So let's dive into this one and talk about the visual offerings on display. Stray is visually one of the most striking games that we have seen throughout the 9th generation of gaming so far. It's a bold statement, but I stand by it. Looking at the visuals holistically, the game is crafted meticulously with no stone left unturned when it comes to creating a realistic setting. The art style reminded me of cyberpunk titles like The Ascent and Ghost Runner in a lot of ways, with the sea of neon and the red hue that dominates most of the areas that you nimbly stroll through. The textures for the most part are jaw-droppingly polished, and this is only further highlighted by the observe function where players can zoom in with their camera for a better look at assets within the world, whether it's the grime of the streets, the rust of an android companion, or the rippling puddles on the ground. You can rest assured that they look incredible. Now, to slip on my harsh critic hat for just a moment, that comment does not apply across the board, as some textures do lack polish in areas. However, they are consistent enough that when you do see a jarring texture here and there, it doesn't suck you out of the experience. However, there were some screen tears and harsh frame drops, especially towards the end of the game where the action on screen was much more busy. This wasn't ideal, but again, it was sporadic enough that it could be overlooked. Then to hone in on the setting in particular, this dystopian world that Blue 12 has created is captivating. Whether it's the narrow, neon-drenched streets of the slums, the dark and sinister sewers, or the surreal and short-lived paradise that is Anti-Village, the environment always feels fresh and new, meaning that players can't help but stop and smell the roses and have a little catnap here and there. Now moving on to the narrative, this was the area of the game that I was almost certain would fall flat. But to my surprise, it's arguably the aspect of this game that is the most compelling. It's certainly the reason why I played this game to completion in a single sitting. The narrative for the first portion of the game is very straightforward and told through visual cues. You've fallen into the dead city and need to find a way out. It's only when you find your droid companion B12 that the game's narrative really opens up. This allows the player to communicate with the AI inhabitants of this world, and in a game where dialogue could have felt very unnatural and killed the flow, it actually adds value and keeps the player engaged. Through the introduction of a group called the Outsiders, giving the player access to open areas full of NPCs and quirky characters, and a much more altruistic and grand goal of freeing the robots from their underground prison, not to mention the subplot of B12's origin, the story has the ability to ramp up over time where it might have run out of steam otherwise. The pacing is superb throughout as your kitty battles to undo the mistakes of the human predecessors, and some moments evoke quite a lot of felines. Feelings, you get it. In short, Stray's story is a surprise package that keeps delivering from start to end without ever overstaying its welcome. Now let's talk about the score of this game, because it's another surprise package that marries together with impressive visuals to create an immersive experience. The overall soundtrack is atmospheric and knows when to go hard and when to pull back. If you're on the run from a horde of Zerks, the soundtrack swells to create a tense and stressful backing track for a wild chase scene. Then on the flip side, if you're exploring a new area and happen upon a secret area, you will be met with a charming piano melody or a culmination of strings that signals that you've happened upon something of significance and that you should do some exploring. However, the game doesn't stop there, as the player will also be able to find collectible sheet music, which can then be brought to Morsky, who will then play a selection of guitar melodies, and if you are anything like me, you'll rest in the bed beside him and take a load off while he serenades you. Then add in some subtle details like the haptic feedback from the DualSense controller, where you can hear yourself purring for example, and you have an auditory assortment that really adds to the experience. Now let's get into the gameplay on offer for this title. This is where I thought this game would shine brightest, but instead of the story being a vehicle for killer gameplay, it's very much the other way around. Firstly, let's focus on the platforming. It feels very satisfying, as in the early stages of the game, you're doing a lot of linear platforming as the game teaches you the core mechanics. However, when the game gets into full swing and the player is tasked with exploring more open environments and indoor spaces, this becomes a little less fun to work with. The camera can be troublesome at times, leading to wrong inputs for leaps or situations where you lose sight of your purring protagonist altogether, and the platforming aspect of this game really runs out of ideas quite fast, leading to sections that feel no more complex than the opening section of the game. The platforming is essentially a means to an end, but it feels like a missed opportunity in my eyes. Then looking at the puzzles, I think Stray succeeds in offering brain teasers that offer a reasonable challenge without being overly complex or frustrating. Thanks to the assistance provided by B12, environmental clues, exposition from NPCs, and clever puzzle design, the player always has a way to crack the code through natural play. I'd be quite surprised if many players needed to consult a guide at any point throughout this game, and that to me indicates great game design. Then lastly, with regards to gameplay, it's also worth mentioning the stealth and combat sections. I thought these were handled very well. The stealth sections reminded me of Deliver Us the Moon due to the similarity of the Sentinel enemies, but in Stray, there were various methods to achieve success through platforming, hiding in boxes, and most importantly, when it all went wrong, there was a lot more room for error. Then when combat was introduced through the use of the Defluxor, this was handled brilliantly. The player was given the tools to defeat the Zerks, but to keep things feeling challenging, the developer created an area where frivolous use of the mechanic would burst egg sacs of Zerks and see the player overwhelmed by enemies. The attention to detail is clear to see throughout all aspects of the gameplay, and while some parts come together much more fluidly than others, as a collective, they combine to create a very fun and satisfying game. So what's the final verdict? Yeah, fur, you get it. Overall, Stray is a triumph. There have been many games in recent history that have cashed in on the cuteness of their concept or marketed their product much better than they've actually developed their game. However, Stray bucks that trend and offers a game that does offer silliness and cuteness in abundance, but importantly, the game also offers value in the form of a killer story, an amazing world to explore, creative albeit straightforward puzzles, sublime visuals, and perfect pacing throughout your time with this cat-tastic title. It's not flawless by any means. There are issues with platforming and the camera at times. Exploration isn't always rewarding. The larger areas like the slums in Midtown can be a labyrinth at times, and the game doesn't actively reward players for completing side quests like other titles might. However, these small gripes are just that, and when you put it to one side, you can see just how impressive Stray is. This game could have easily been a gimmick, but instead, it's potentially the best indie game that we will see this year. One more cat pun for the road? Okay. Stray is a game that you won't soon forget. I've been Callum, and this is Indie Game Culture's review of Stray on PS5.